all to slow down in this moment. And just to really settle ourselves, whether you're sitting or lying down, whether you're in silence, there's nobody around you, or whether there is distraction, just being with that and just letting us slow down in this moment. So I'm going to invite us to take a few minutes, and we're going to just do a little grounding. So you can keep your eyes open, you can close your eyes, just sense what feels comfortable and right for you in this moment. So as you're sitting, just notice the support at your back, whether you're lying flat or whether there's the solidness of a chair at your back. Just sensing your arms and your legs. And drawing all your awareness in this moment to your breath. So we're breathing in through our nose and exhaling out through our mouth. And as you breathe, I would invite you on the inhale to raise your right hand slowly up. So we're going to inhale together, and as we do that, you're raising your right hand up. And then on the exhale, you're bringing your right hand back down, going at a pace that feels comfortable for you. Okay, so we'll try that together. So we're breathing in, and we're exhaling, bringing the hand down. And again, feel free to close your eyes or leave your eyes open, and you can look at me, hearing my voice, whatever feels comfortable for you. So we're inhaling with the hand and exhale down. And again, inhale and exhale out and down. So drawing all your awareness of this moment here now to the breath and the body. Sensing your feet flat on the ground. And just sensing that stillness in this moment. There's no right or wrong way to do this, just being with yourself in the moment. So now we're going to move to our left hand. And again, we're going to do it for 3 times. So in your own time, on the inhale, raising your left hand, and on the exhale, lowering your left hand. Okay. I'm just wondering if the sound is okay. Is that a bit better? Back. We're going to come back to our breath. We're going to come back to our bodies. In this moment, just sensing ourselves here and now. So we're going to go to the left hand. Breathing in, raising your left hand. And on the exhale, lowering your left hand. And we're going to do that again. Nice and gentle. Breathing in. Exhale, lowering the hand. And one more time, breathing in. And exhaling, lowering the hand. Just noticing how you feel in this moment. However you are is welcome here and is welcome in this moment. And just being with that. You don't have to do anything for the rest of this session, just being, all of us just being here together. Okay, so I'm going to share screen now.
Perfect.
Okay, so we're working away. Yeah, that's okay.
Perfect.
How is the sound now, Sive? Ourselves sometimes. And that is an aspect of being human. I should have been harder on myself. You know, no one has ever said that. But we are very hard on ourselves. So I'm going to read out some statements that are made sometimes by people who are well-intentioned in our lives, perhaps, or ourselves, or perhaps we fear hearing these things, this criticalness, this critical self-talk sometimes. And we all experience it. It's a human problem, it's not a you problem. And whether you do live with a chronic condition, or whether you live with anxiety or depression or everyday problems, whatever it might be, we all hear these things. So I'm going to read them out, and I would invite you, as I'm reading them, to just notice how you feel in your body as you hear them. Notice how your nervous system is. You have what? I've never heard of that. You need to exercise more. Aren't you feeling better yet? Maybe an antidepressant would help. But you look just fine to me. You don't look sick at all. You're probably taking too much medicine. You need to change your diet. It's all in your head. Lose some weight and that will probably help. Just be more positive. Just be positive. Get over it. Try yoga. Do this. Do that. So just notice in this moment how your body responds. As I read those out, I noticed for myself, for example, that my chest tightened a little bit as I was saying those things. Just notice what happens to you. You may feel sad. You may have a sense of anger. You may sense pain in your body as you hear those things. Just notice those sensations. You don't have to do anything with them right now, just notice. Would you say these things to somebody else? Do you say these things to yourself sometimes? How compassionate is this? And as I said, this is not a you problem. This is a human problem. So what is self-compassion? Self-compassion is giving the same kindness to ourselves that we would give to others. And you probably all experience that we have no problem giving compassion to other people, but we really struggle to give it to ourselves sometimes. Self-compassion means taking an attitude, bringing an attitude of kindness towards ourselves and acceptance towards ourselves, not towards our idea of being perfect, not towards the perfect self we want to be, but towards the person that we are now. And becoming self-compassionate, it is a process. It's not something that we're taught. We're taught to be kind to others. We're taught to give to others. But maybe some of you can relate to this, that sometimes we're conditioned and taught that giving loving kindness to yourself, I mean, that's just selfish. So we typically tend to be kind and compassionate to others, but harsh and uncaring towards ourselves. So this is a type of intense self-focus that we tend to over-identify with our limitations, and we get carried away then by these negative thoughts about ourselves. We forget that we're human, that we're imperfect, that we fail, that failure and imperfection are part of a shared, a larger human experience. And when we forget that, we're not perfect, this can keep us feeling isolated. So self-compassion involves being kind towards oneself because of our weaknesses, not in spite of them. And remembering that being human even means being flawed and imperfect and learning from our mistakes. So there's forgiveness with self-compassion. And you might notice how slowly I'm finding myself talking in this moment. And when I talk about self-compassion, I embody a sense of kindness and patience and slowing down. So self-compassion is not letting yourself off the hook, but rather it's accepting your humanness in spite of things that are not perfect. And I don't know about any of you, but sometimes I find myself wondering or hearing things like when you read stuff online, or maybe we say things to ourselves like and other people say it to us too, be positive, be kind, be nicer to yourself, don't be so hard on yourself. Don't be so hard on yourself. Stop beating yourself up. Stop doing this, stop doing that. Be kinder, be sweeter to yourself. Take time for yourself. And sometimes I find myself getting frustrated with that, because it's like as if to say we're choosing to not bring self-compassion to ourselves. If it was that easy, we would all be doing it all of the time. If it was that easy, that it's something that we wouldn't have to learn. But we do have to learn it, and we can learn it. So as somebody, as I said, who lives with a chronic condition myself, that's something that I have noticed and that I find quite frustrating sometimes. Just be positive, as if there's just a button that I should be able to press and all of a sudden I'm more positive. And as humans, we all know that it just doesn't work like that. It just doesn't work that way. So we're not choosing to not be compassionate with ourselves. We struggle with it. Something is amiss and something overwhelms us and we go into survival mode. And that's part of being human. That's what comes with trauma or anxiety and all the different types of challenges with that. So I'm not choosing, in other words, I'm not choosing to treat myself this way. Sometimes it feels like it's just happening. I struggle, or I can't seem to take time for myself, or I can't seem to take care of myself the way other people do. And then we end up comparing ourselves to others. So when we talk about self-compassion, we are talking about bringing mindfulness to ourselves, that it's not my fault. I'm doing okay and I'm doing the best that I can. So something that helps me understand self-compassion better, and I hope it helps you understand it, is that it is a choice. I can choose to be more self-aware, and I can choose to bring more self-compassion into my life. So it is a feeling, it's a thought, it's a behavior, it's an idea, it's a concept, it's a sense, it's a skill that you can learn. So I might just see if anybody has any questions or anything at this point. If there's anything anybody would like to share or ask. What comes with self-compassion is this idea of acceptance. So I'm going to talk just a little bit now about where does acceptance come in? Where does self-acceptance come in? And I suppose what I would really like to encourage you to understand and remember is that you don't have to be accepting of your condition, or you don't have to feel a sense of self-acceptance in order to feel self-compassion, or in order to bring self-compassion to yourself. Because sometimes acceptance, the idea of acceptance, it can feel like a pressure, like something that's some destination I have to get to. I have to be able to accept myself before I can experience anything else. And that's in my own experience, and from my own experience of working with clients, that's simply not true. So acceptance doesn't mean resignation. It means understanding that something is what it is, and there's got to be a way through it. And that's from Michael J. Fox. And I don't know if any of you know Michael J. Fox. He lives with Parkinson's. So acceptance, you don't have to feel like, okay, I have to be in a state of self-acceptance before I can experience self-compassion. Okay, so that is as I call it, that's a myth. And there's a lot of pressure on that. There's a lot of pressure that people experience about that. Maybe you're not ready to accept something. Maybe you're just not there yet. Maybe it takes time, but it doesn't mean that you can't experience self-compassion and loving kindness. So for a moment, as you are there, just present to yourself here and now in this moment, I would invite you to just sense what the word acceptance means to you. What does it mean to you? What comes to mind? What comes to your heart? What comes to your body when you think of the word acceptance? And just take a moment with that. Trusting whatever comes in this moment is real for you. And sometimes acceptance can mean, does that mean I have to give up or surrender, or does that make me weaker that I have to accept something? And it's tricky, it's challenging to accept something that can feel so painful, so confusing, so isolating. It's very difficult. Maybe that is something you can accept, that your reality is difficult. So acceptance means making space for your pain or your hurt or your sadness or whatever it is that is present to you. Acceptance is honoring respecting the presence of that pain in your life. And acceptance means seeing that there is room for that pain alongside everything else that makes you you. So imagine for a moment how free you might feel if you were to let go of your idea of how things are supposed to be. So I'm going to just say that again, okay? Just in this moment, just imagine what it might feel like if you were to let go of how you think things are supposed to be, how they're supposed to feel, how they're supposed to look. Maybe that's other self-talk that you experience sometimes. I'm not supposed to feel this. Surely I'm not supposed to feel this way. So acceptance does not mean you have to resign yourself to that. It means being mindful and understanding of that for yourself and the existence of that pain or hurt or grief or sadness or whatever it might be. It doesn't mean you have to deal with it and, okay, I've dealt with that now and I'm accepting of that now and everything is fine. Okay, so let's talk about some other myths, okay? So Kristin Neff, okay, is somebody who is renowned, along with Brené Brown, for research on self-compassion, okay? And 5 myths of self-compassion that she talks about, 5 myths of self-compassion that she talks about are that self-compassion is a form of pity. And just as I talk about these myths, just notice what happens to you when I say them. Just notice what happens in your body. Without any judgment or expectation on yourself in this moment right now, just noticing what happens. Self-compassion is a form of pity. Self-compassion means weakness. Self-compassion will make me complacent. Self-compassion is narcissistic. Self-compassion is selfish. Just notice what happens to you and how you are hearing that, hearing those myths about self-compassion. And there are lots of different obstacles to experiencing self-compassion. It's unique to each individual and it's personal to each individual. There are different obstacles or blocks or challenges that make it harder for us to experience self-compassion and to bring self-compassion into our lives. So I'm going to give an example of a block to self-compassion that perhaps someone who experiences migraine experiences. And this is just an example for migraine. So perhaps having a migraine might feel like the worst thing you have to deal with, and that every other day challenges or problems then become undervalued or underestimated. Maybe during a migraine, you absolutely do what you have to do to take care of yourself and you get through it in that moment, and you get through it for however long you need to. And then afterwards, you don't want to talk about it or think about it, you just want to move on. Perhaps this feels like coping or managing, and perhaps this works really well in lots of different ways for you. But in other ways, perhaps it lacks a sense of connection with yourself or mindfulness or self-awareness or self-acknowledgement. And then perhaps this keeps you disconnected from yourself and then from others. So that's just an example of an obstacle to self-compassion, is that type of isolation or denial, the grief, the pressure to do the right thing, the pressure to function, to survive, to cope. So with these obstacles, I have learned that I have found it helpful to be curious about them, to try not to judge these obstacles or barriers that get in the way of me bringing self-compassion to myself, that I try to bring curiosity about them. Those obstacles, like for me, I'm going to share with you about myself. You know, for me, an obstacle that gets in the way of giving myself more self-compassion is I deny my need for self-compassion. I don't want to even acknowledge to myself that I need it, because then that would make what my condition is real. And I don't want to have to think about that. I don't want to be with that. I just want to move on, like a tunnel vision. So denying that I even need self-compassion means that I keep myself distant from the reality of my condition. And that blocks me bringing self-compassion to myself, for sure. Maybe some of you can relate to that. So as I said, I've learned that having open curiosity about these obstacles and understanding them a bit better is very self-compassionate, and it helps me to feel closer to myself. Getting to know those obstacles, what gets in the way of me bringing compassion to myself? What am I standing in the way of, or what's standing in my way? So perhaps as I'm sharing that, you might be thinking of some obstacles that you have. Maybe you can relate to what I have said. Maybe it's self-judgment, self-criticism. Maybe it's too painful, the grief. Maybe you're really down on yourself because of what you're experiencing and living with. Maybe there's low self-worth. It's not about judging yourself for those obstacles. It's about seeing them as informative. So maybe if I'm able to look at what gets in the way of me bringing self-compassion to myself, and if I can acknowledge them and be curious about them, then maybe they won't have so much power anymore. Maybe they won't have so much power, and maybe they won't get in the way as much if I've acknowledged them and given them some room. So the example I gave of pretending that I don't need self-compassion, because if I acknowledge I need self-compassion or to be kinder to myself, that means that there's a reason I need it. And I associate that with my own chronic condition. And that, as I said, that blocks me from bringing it. So acknowledging the denial that I experience sometimes, it really helps me to get out of my own way and to have more forgiveness for myself and more patience. And that's what self-compassion is about, is forgiving yourself, having patience with yourself. You're doing the best you can. I mean, anyone that is listening to this talk or listening to this talk as I share right now, I mean, you're tuned in, you're present, you're engaging with what I'm saying. So maybe you have more self-compassion than you give yourself credit for. Maybe you sense more compassion for yourself than you realize. Okay. So let's talk more about self-compassion and what self-compassion is. Self-compassion consists of self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. What does that mean? What does having self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness, what has that got to do with self-compassion? And that's what self-compassion consists of. So being self-kind means you're not being so critical on yourself. You're embracing yourself as you are. You're learning how to be your own friend. And you're treating yourself the way you would treat a friend. And that's what self-compassion is. And then the common humanity of that is how, in the more collective sense, that we are human and we all have flaws, that we have a shared human experience of not being so alone in our struggles. And mindfulness means recognizing when being hard on yourself or self-critical. It creates that space. So how are they connected? And so take a moment just to look at this image. So starting at the top with self-kindness and how they're all interlinked. They exist together. Self-kindness, mindfulness, and common humanity, they exist together and they support your sense of bringing self-compassion to yourself. So self-kindness, not judging yourself. Mindfulness, seeing yourself more objectively. I'm human. I'm doing the best that I can. And the common humanity, we all make mistakes. We're all imperfect. So I'm just going to say a little bit more about each of them. Okay, and if you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to come in. So self-kindness as opposed to self-judgment. Okay, so treating yourself with care and understanding rather than harsh judgment. Actively comforting yourself in order to support protecting yourself. And having the desire. Self-kindness is having the desire and the will to alleviate your suffering. Common humanity versus isolation means seeing your own experience as part of the larger human experience. Understanding that it is normal to suffer and to struggle. And recognizing that life is imperfect and that so are we as humans. And then mindfulness rather than over-identification. Mindfulness is how we can help ourselves to accept or be with the powerful feelings that are present, and how we can avoid those blocks that I talked about, the blocks to self-compassion, how we can avoid suppressing or repressing, denying, disidentifying from those painful feelings. So mindfulness is an essential component of self-compassion because it gives us the space and the awareness we need to help us to cultivate a kinder attitude towards ourselves in the present moment. When I saw this, I thought this was a nice explanation of mindfulness. Mindfulness is a contrast to overthinking. It helps us to settle and to see things clearer and to think clearer. So We've got mindfulness and self-compassion. And as you can see in the two columns, the differences between them both and how one supports the other. So when I'm mindful of an acceptance of my experience, that helps me to focus on caring for me and my own experience. Mindfulness helps us to draw our attention to what am I experiencing now in this moment. And if I know what I'm experiencing now in this moment, then the self-compassion is, what do I need now? Mindfulness says, feel your suffering with spatial awareness. In other words, that the mindfulness of the here and now, how you are in this moment, helps you be clearer with it. And when you're clearer with it, you can bring kindness to it. And whether that's your heart or your body or your mind, mindfulness and self-compassion go hand in hand. And self-compassion is treating yourself how you would treat a small child. When you think about how you would treat a small child, self-compassion is you treating yourself that same way, with that same respect and honor and dignity and fundamental basic needs and kindness. So just taking a moment, just notice how you're feeling right now in this moment. And taking a breath and just sensing how you are. Maybe you're very in your head, thinking about what you're seeing and what I've been sharing. Maybe you have a sensation in your body. And just pay attention to that for a moment. So self-kindness can look lots of different ways. And like self-compassion, it's personal to you. It's subjective. Something that is self-caring or self-kind to you may be very different for me. They're just some examples. I'm sure you have lots of things that work really well for you, and you're open to learning more ways of bringing self-kindness to yourself and self-compassion. But I'm hoping that what I've shared today about self-compassion consisting of self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness will be really important in how you perceive self-compassion and how you think about it. And we also talked about the myths of self-compassion that are also, you could say, are myths about acceptance or self-acceptance. And there's just some examples of types of rest. As you look at those, just notice, can you relate to any of those? Maybe there's some that you've tried. Maybe there's some that you'd like to try. So self-compassion can be so personal. It is unique to you, and there's many different ways that you can experience it. And that's what I find is the beautiful thing about self-compassion, is that it is unique to yourself and what makes you you. And once you understand it, which is the mindfulness, you can focus on being curious about, okay, well, what's self-kindness for me? How does that stand with my place in common humanity? So self-compassion, ways of practicing self-compassion can be self-care, slowing down, self-soothing. Self-soothing can involve self-touch, self-talk, self-awareness. Other ways of practicing self-compassion include mindfulness, as we talked about, pacing. And what does pacing mean? Being more mindful of the pace that I'm taking on a day, on an average day. How does that affect me? How does that block me? Does that stand in my way of giving myself what I need? How am I with that? Am I okay with that? How do I feel about that? So not judging yourself. Patience, self-respect. And a really important one is loyalty. Loyalty with yourself. That goes back to what we talked about how you treat yourself and how self-compassion is bringing kindness to yourself the way you would to a friend. Are you a good friend to yourself? Do you find that hard? Being curious about those questions and those things for yourself. That's you being self-compassionate. That's you wanting self-compassion. I'm just mindful that when I spoke about acceptance, there was something else I wanted to share about acceptance, and I'm not sure I shared it. So just bear with me for a moment, my apologies. But essentially it was about expectations. And with acceptance and self-compassion is about distancing ourselves from expectations. Expectations put a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure on ourselves. A lot of responsibility taking care of ourselves. Sometimes that can feel overwhelming. Sometimes that can feel really hard. And you feel like struggling or drowning or just isolating yourself. So distancing ourselves from expectations and releasing that pressure of having to be a certain way. This is not how it was supposed to go. So that's quite harsh, that self-talk. And I wanted to invite you now to practice a way of self-compassion with me. And that way of self-compassion is bringing self-soothing and self-talk. So I'm going to invite you now to practice that with me. So as you sit in your chair, and you feel the support of the chair at your back and underneath you. And again, keeping your eyes open or closing your eyes. Whatever feels right for you. We're going to practice a soothing touch and soothing talk. So feeling your arms and your legs and your feet flat on the ground. I would invite you to place one hand on top and over your heart. So putting one hand over your heart. And now if you can, unless you're holding a device or something, put your other hand on top of the hand over your heart. And actually in this moment, I would invite you to close your eyes. And so with your eyes closed, one hand on your heart, and the other hand over the hand on your heart. Notice what that feels like. Is that nice? Is that soothing? And now try and bring one of your hands down onto your belly. So you're leaving one hand on your heart and you're bringing the other hand and placing it gently on your belly. And just sense here and now what that feels like. And just notice without any judgment or expectation. Notice if your head is coming in. Maybe you have some racing thoughts. Maybe your mind is thinking. Without any judgment, just acknowledge that that's what our mind does and that that's okay. And bringing your attention back to your breath and back to your hand on your heart and your hand on your belly. And taking that breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And now bring the hand that's on the heart, bringing that hand down and placing it on the hand that's on your belly. And very gently, I would invite you to rub your belly. In whatever pace feels comfortable for you. And just sense here and now with your eyes closed as you breathe what that feels like. And now, in your own time, bringing one hand up to your shoulder and bringing the other hand up to your shoulder. I'm mindful I don't want to hit my headphones, but you're bringing your other hand up to your shoulder. And with soothing and gentleness and loving kindness, you're giving space and presence and awareness to yourself in this moment. And giving yourself that space is self-compassion. It doesn't have to be extraordinary. It doesn't have to cost money. It can be something very personal and very simple. So I would invite you now to choose one of those poses, those positions, whether it's the self-hug, whether it's the two hands on the heart, the two hands on the belly, or the two hands on the belly with the rug. I encourage you now in this moment to just pick one of them and just trust whichever pose you're drawn to for you. So in that pose, keeping your eyes closed, focusing on your breath, being mindful in this moment of giving yourself this kindness of space, letting yourself be however you are. There's no right or wrong way to be with yourself in this moment. And in whichever pose you chose for yourself, I would invite you to sense a challenge in your life. Sense a difficulty in your life that comes to mind, that comes to your presence, and trust whatever comes. So thinking of that current difficulty and being in your pose, you're going to say to yourself in a gentle, tender voice, it is difficult. It is difficult. It is a normal part of life. Suffering is a normal part of life. It is difficult. And I'm okay. And notice, take your body's lead. Take your body's lead with that. Maybe you want to move to another pose. Take your body's lead with that. Trusting what your body wants in this moment. Trusting its intelligence to show you as you give mindful self-kindness and self-compassion to yourself. So, in self-soothing and self-talk are crucial and really effective ways of experiencing and bringing self-compassion to yourself. Changing how you talk to yourself. Trusting that you know when it feels okay, when it's helpful, and trusting that you know when it's not. So drawing your attention back to your breath. You're welcome to stay as you are. You're welcome to come out of it and reconnect with me in this moment. I'm just going to read a poem as we come to the end of this time together this evening. Good morning, heartbreaker, says the stranger in the mirror. Who is that girl? Maybe I'll always hate her. I'm still drowning in her demons, fighting this hell away. But I find hope every day in believing that someday she'll say, I love you, and you are beautiful exactly the way you are today. And I just want to acknowledge, okay, that some of the material that I used today is from Kristin Neff, okay, and if any of you would like to know more about self-compassion, or you'd like to read or listen to some guided meditations on self-compassion, I would invite you to check out this website. It's Kristin Neff's website. It's selfcompassion.org, and it's a really good resource. It's got meditations and teachings and articles, and I think she runs some courses from her website as well. Okay.